Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on our LexAlign webinar this afternoon. It's the week before Christmas, so we're honored that you're spending some time with us this afternoon. My name is Julie Goff. I lead client success and product at LexAlign. And the topic for the hour today is, of course, the new Nacha fraud monitoring rules that will be going into effect next year. So we know this is very timely, hot on everyone's mind. So we want this hour to be a great resource for you, something you can take back to your teams, refer back to as you learn and as you prepare heading into next year. So Trevor, if you want to go to the next slide really quick. So here's our plan for the next 60 minutes together. We're going to spend the bulk of our time today really looking at the rules. So some of you have probably read them ad nauseum. Others maybe haven't looked at them quite in detail yet. That's okay. We're going to look at the rules together, break them down, understand what they say, what they're asking of us, what they require, etc. And then we're going to think about the toolkit that we need to be ready for the rules, right? So there may be pieces of technology, tools, personnel, things that we're going to need in order to prepare for the rules and think about kind of all of that together. And then, of course, we'll give you a quick preview at the end of LexAlign and how we contribute to the toolkit. So in order to do that, Trevor, if you want to hit the next slide here. We are joined today by our founder and CEO, Trevor Lain. Trevor is not only deeply knowledgeable about these rules, he's also an excellent teacher. So you can just sit back, listen, learn, and we hope you'll leave the session today a lot more knowledgeable and prepared based on these rules. So with that, Trevor, will you go ahead, introduce yourself, and then take it away on the rules analysis?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. Everyone, thanks for coming and attending this so soon before the holidays. We hope this is helpful to you. We've done this before and we've gotten really good feedback on it. Again, my name is Trevor Lain. I founded LexAlign after being an attorney for banks for about 20 years, and I founded it to solve what I considered a systemic problem in banking that I saw as a contributing factor in multiple crises and growing. And that is how to enable the management of remote operations, in this case, customer operations. And we're going to see an example of that today. So I'm just going to jump right in. So we're going to talk about Notch's new fraud monitoring rules. There's more than one that are going into effect in 2026. For most people, the pertinent deadline is in June, but for some, it's in March. And we're going to, the objective is, as Julie says, to provide a very practical view of what compliance means under these rules, what boxes we have to check in order to be secure that we are meeting our responsibility and enabling others to do the same. So let's identify those rules quickly. There are two main rules that we'll focus on. One is in Article 2 of the Nacha operating rules. It's the identification of unauthorized entries or entries authorized under false pretenses. This is the one that's applicable to originators and transmitters. So the ODFI, their originators are TPS, et cetera. Then there's this counterpart rule in Article 3, identification of unauthorized credit entries or credit entries authorized under false pretenses. This is the one that's applicable to your role as the RDFI. There are other rules that are pertinent because none of these rules stands alone. They are embedded in articles. And so we're going to look at some of those other rules that help us to interpret what Notch's intent or expectation is. And let me pause there for a moment and say, it's not just what Nacha says that is relevant to analysis. It's the fact that words exist on an authoritative source, whether it's a rule book, a regulation, official guidance, anything that an auditor or examiner can point to as authoritative and as creating an expectation. So we want to take into account all those so that we aren't caught unawares. Okay, so jumping into the first rule. This is a rule that's upstream of the ACH operator. As I said, it's in Article 2, and it says that each non-consumer originator, each third-party sender, each ODFI, must establish and implement risk-based processes and procedures relevant to the role it plays in the authorization or transmission of entries that are reasonably intended to identify entries that are suspected of being unauthorized or authorized under false pretenses, and at least annually review those processes and procedures and make appropriate updates to address evolving risks. There's another section of the rule that we're not going to cover today that basically says none of this shifts risk from one party to another. Just because we talk about originator or third-party sender in this doesn't mean the ODFI is off the hook. Um, but we're not going to really spend much time on that. We want to figure out what this part really means in terms of compliance. So let's look at the landscape of um, who we're talking about here. And so, as I said, it's upstream of the ACH operator where you have the originator, whether it's a first-party originator or a nested originator, a third-party originator coming through the third-party sender. That entries are then coming to the bank and then, or the credit union in some cases, and then being sent on to the ACH operator. As we see, the fraudsters are really looking at the originators and to a certain extent the third-party sender, but really the originators as the entry points, as the susceptible or vulnerable points that they can manipulate or do account takeover in order to push the money out from their account to a fraudulent account at the RDFI. So the first rule covers everything upstream of the operator. First question, who is covered? So again, each non-consumer originator, each third-party sender, and each ODFI. Okay, so each means every, and those are the relevant parties for what we're here today. You're not responsible for third-party service providers to the same extent that we're talking. So note that the rule starts with the customer, and that's very unusual for a Nacha rule to emphasize that the customer as a covered party. And what do we make of that? How should we interpret that? Well, 3 years ago, Nacha called for a new risk management framework to stop credit push fraud. Now, and they said the new framework works only if all participants play a role. So the key point here, all participants necessarily includes the customer, the originator, or the third-party sender as the starting point. The customer, as we just discussed, is the point of attack. And so we need their help in preventing credit push fraud. We're going to come back to that. And this explains the new rule, which basically codifies this call from 2022 that everybody must play an active role. And we've tested that interpretation with Nacha and heard repeatedly, yes, that's the case. So then what is required of those parties? Well, they're supposed to establish and implement risk-based processes and procedures that are reasonably intended to identify entries that are suspected of being unauthorized or authorized under false pretenses, and of course, do an annual review. So let's unpack a couple of those terms. False pretenses means the inducement of a payment, by a person misrepresenting that person's identity or that person's association with or authority to act on the behalf of another person, or the ownership of an account to be credited. Nacha has provided some guidance as to what to think. The examples that they've provided include business email compromise, vendor impersonation, payroll impersonation, and other payee impersonations. In case that isn't clear, that means when someone that you know is a vendor comes to you and says, we're changing our payment account. And so from now on, I need you to send payment to a different account. You might think that's your vendor. It might be somebody impersonating that vendor. So obviously they know a little bit about your business. If they are already knowing, and or your customer's business in this case, if they know that this is a vendor relationship or they know that this is a payroll relationship. So they're likely already burrowed into the customer and have watched them over time. What about authorization? So authorization can take many forms, but a lot of the rules deal with authorization specifically on the debit side. But on the credit side, authorization can mean, again, authorization of the receiver. Have we really gotten authorization from the receiver to credit a particular account? And that goes to the impersonations that we discussed. But there's also the case of account takeover, where the fraudsters not only burrowed in and watched the customer, but now they've stolen their credentials and are actually impersonating the customer. They're using their credentials to initiate a credit entry from the account that they've then accessed. That's nothing new. So then we have to look at some other language in the rules. first is relevant to the role it plays. So this is role-based compliance, and this really is the key to unlocking the rule. The roles are authorization or transmission. The final piece that we want to look at is that risk-based. Okay. So risk-based means you don't need to treat every entry the same. You don't need to treat every party the same, every originator, every third-party sender. It's all right to spend your time on the ones that present the higher risk. But of course, in order to do that, you need data points. You need to be able to say, we spent our time with this originator, this third-party sender, or these types of transactions because they represent the higher risk. Okay. And so having data as a basis is a key to that. You might have noticed that I have a cold, and so I apologize for the sound of my voice. I've been working on it all morning, but that doesn't seem to have really done so much. Okay, so what is the practical implication? The first one is we need to consider each covered party separately and their specific role. Let's start with the ODFI. So most of the people on this call represent ODFIs, and their role is the transmission of entries. So they're getting entries from the originators or third-party senders and then sending them on to the operator. So what's expected in practical terms of the ODFI? The first tool we need should satisfy the ODFI's responsibility as a transmitter of entries, and that solution should identify fraudulent transactions among incoming entries that the bank sends to the OC, so the ACH operator. So screening all entries is not required. It's made very clear under the FAQs, but transaction monitoring as a solution is encouraged, and particularly if you can show scrutiny of higher risk transactions. The key point and a source of comfort it should be to you is that you probably already have a solution for this as transaction monitoring became a standard in the era of debit fraud. So starting from the early teens, there was a focus on this. Um, what you should do is just make sure that it's enhanced to cover credit fraud as well. And so your providers are probably already talking to you about the new rules and saying that they cover compliance with the rules. Now, whenever you hear a provider say, oh, yeah, we have compliance or we have end-to-end compliance, understand that it relates to what they're doing. It doesn't mean that they comply, that they provide a solution for the entire rule. It just means that they are going to offer you compliance for the piece that they provide. Okay, that's key. So we've got the first tool rather, and check, and that's great. But unfortunately, it's not quite enough because as we saw, there's others. So the next party is the originator. Their role is in the authorization of entries. Okay, they're the ones that obtain authorization from the receiver, and by originating, they're saying they're doing it on their own behalf. Now, what is their role under the rule? The role is really preventing account takeover and detecting and preventing false pretense transactions. Now, these are transactions that are designed to evade your transaction monitoring, right? The reason the fraudsters are going into those customers is because they can make them look like legitimate transactions to your fraud monitoring system. So we can't solely rely on that. And we need to, and that's why Nacha has said we need these other parties to play an active role. The challenge is that at the customer side, it's largely a human factor risk. There's not a plugin that will work to stop them from sending false pretenses, from being duped, in other words, or from preventing account takeover. And so and particularly a technology that you've implemented on at the bank premise is not going to help with the customer's human factor risk. That means we need to empower the customer, the originator, to manage their risk. We need to sensitize and empower them. And Julie's going to go into more of that. The problem, of course, or the challenge is that manual approaches just aren't scalable. And the rule said each non-consumer originator. So how do we do that? And why do we call it tool 2A rather than tool number 2? There's a larger point to be made here, and that is that Nacha does not have direct authority over the originator or the third-party senders. The rules do not apply directly to them. The rules apply directly to the ODFI and only indirectly via the origination agreement to the originator and to the third-party senders, in other words, to your customers. Now, Nacha is not a party to those agreements, so it can't enforce the agreement. And therefore, it leaves it up to the ODFI to enforce the compliance responsibility. And that is why Article 2 of the operating rules starts with this general rule. A more fundamental point, as I made before, is that the new rules aren't standalone. They are incorporated into articles in the Nacha rules and are meant to be read in conjunction with those rules. And this was actually a major point that Nacha made in a webinar that we did over the summer. But what does it mean in practical terms? The general rule makes the ODFI responsible, not only for all entries, but specifically for its originators and third-party senders' compliance with the rules. So each time you see each ODF, each originator, each third-party sender, think, what does that mean to the bank? Implicit and explicit implication of the rules is that you have some visibility on your customer's compliance. And that's best achieved through assessments. And the rules indeed give you the right to do that by requiring that you include that compliance audit rights in each origination agreement. So keep that in mind when thinking about how do we check this box. Finally, in the FAQs, Nacha has finally articulated a standard for what it means to assess or rely on a customer's or originator's compliance. And when it comes to their compliance with the rule, Nacha has said that they expect their compliance to be verified by appropriate oversight. So now we have a standard, we have a bar that an examiner, an auditor can use to determine if we have empowered and determined that the originator or the third-party sender is meeting their expectation or their obligations under the rules. And how do we do that? So there is a tool B. We need records. Not only do we need the originator to be stood up and empowered and sensitized to identify and manage account verification and do their annual review and protect against false pretenses and unauthorized transactions, but we also need records and scoring at the bank side that can demonstrate the verification by appropriate oversight standard. Okay, so the tool number 2 has two sides to it, the originator side and the ODFI side. So we've covered these two tools, but as they say, there's more to come. The third party is the third-party sender. Now, this is a box that might not apply to all banks because you might not have a third-party sender. Although, as you assess your originators using the tool from number 2, you may find that some originators have over time become third-party senders. And in that case, this box becomes highly relevant to your overall compliance with the new rules. Now, the third-party sender's role is similar to yours as the ODFI. It's in the transmission of entries. Okay, so third-party senders can also act as originators, but we've covered that in the originator review that we've just discussed. So we're talking about people who act as third-party senders and what is required of them under the rule. Well, it's to do pretty much the same as you have done, which is to identify and stop transmission of fraudulent entries. So the first question is, are they monitoring high-risk transactions similar to what you're expected to do, but calibrated to their risk? Remember, this is risk-based. So if they're high volume or work with a wide array of originators and transactions or active in higher risk sectors or with higher risk entries, and there we're talking about like TEL entries, web entries, others that are considered higher risk under the rules, then their solution should be robust. They should have more of a bank-like solution. On the other hand, if they are much lower risk, their solution might just be procedures. If it's a very, low volume third-party senders, they might just have procedures in place to make sure that nothing seems out of the ordinary in terms of the entries that they get from their originators. In either event, that's not enough because as we saw, you're held to a standard of verified by appropriate oversight. So do you have records to show that they've implemented a risk-based approach? So once again, you were responsible for your third-party sender's compliance. Fortunately for us in this case, with this box, the Nacha rules impose an annual self-audit requirement on the third-party senders. They're supposed to do an audit of their compliance, just like you are supposed to do of yours. And under a new rule, and I think this has gotten a little wonky here, but under a new, not a rule, but a new bulletin that came out in September, Notch has begun to talk about proof of audit. And it relates to an article that came out earlier this year where the Risk Management Advisory Group talked about reviewing third-party sender audits and determining that in some cases they could not provide a proof of audit. And so Nacha is now talking about not just an attestation of audit, but an attestation of proof of audit. And they're spelling out what that means. So there is a sort of a growing expectation of an evidentiary requirement or standard that they're expecting you to review. But the good news is here for you, under this third box, it's probably sufficient that you obtain proof of audit from the third-party sender to determine, to be able to say, yes, we know that the third-party sender is meeting their expectations or their requirements under the rule to identify and stop transmission of fraudulent transactions. We have the records from their annual audit. Okay. So that gets us to the fourth box, and this takes us to the rule in Article 3, which relates to what's downstream of the operator, where these credit entries are then coming to the bank. And then the obligation in the RDFI is to establish and implement risk-based processes and procedures relevant to the role it plays in connection with the receipt of credit entries, and that those processes and procedures are reasonably intended to identify credit entries that are suspected of being unauthorized or authorized under false pretenses. We covered what that means, but including processes and procedures for responding when credit entries are identified as potentially unauthorized or authorized under false pretense. A lot of language here: potentially unauthorized, responding to them, detecting them, etc., and at least annually reviewing with it that you're continuing to address the incoming standards. Now, a solution to satisfy the RDFI's responsibility, um, the RDFI, excuse me, the RDFI will probably not know the circumstances of origination. Excuse me, but the rules and FAQs still require them to monitor for fact patterns that suggest something is wrong. And Notch has enumerated a few of those. And they include a standard entry class code that does not align with the type of receiving account, such as a corporate CCD entry to a consumer account. So your solution should be able to flag for that. Or a high dollar transaction that is atypical for the receiving account, or a series of similar credit entries received within a short period of time, such as multiple payroll or benefit payments to a single consumer account. It's clearly an indication something is up. Or any of the above to a new account, a dormant account, or to an account acting as a mule. So there is some expectations that you're looking at account creation. There's a lot of language in the guidance about online account creation, etc. So a tool that at least flags those kinds of mismatches or those fact patterns is something that you're going to look for here. And whether you develop it internally or it's procedural or you obtain it from somebody else, that is the fourth box to check. So in sum, you're compliant if you're able to demonstrate the following with appropriate records. Compliance always means records. That's something that I've always repeated as an attorney. One, the ODFI has implemented steps or systems to identify and prevent transmission of fraudulent entries. Okay. Don't have to look at every entry, but on a risk basis, you're doing that. Second, your originators have taken steps at authorization to detect and to stop fraud based on lack of authorization or false pretenses, and you have records and scoring reflecting that. Third, your third-party senders have taken steps to identify and prevent transmission of fraudulent entries. And again, you have records, but in this case, satisfactory proof of audit is probably fine. And then fourth, as the RDFI, you are detecting and acting on incoming credit entries that present any of those patterns, fact patterns that indicate something is off. And in each case, each of these parties must be able to show that they're doing an annual review to make sure they're addressing the evolving risks. So then it gets us to practical implication number two. There's no one tool that's going to do all of those. It's going to check all of those boxes for you. So we're really looking at a toolkit approach, and that's been, sort of our mantra that we've been talking to institutions about over the last couple of months is um, there's a lot of parties out there that say they can help you with compliance with the rules. It's great, but it's very important to align what they're offering with the different boxes. And our purpose here is to help you to do that, is to see, okay, I have X solution. Which of those boxes does it help with? Which ones does it perhaps not deal with? And just to make it very clear for you, we've created this sort of puzzle diagram here that shows the different pieces that you have to fit. First, the ODFI, second, the originators, third, the third-party senders, and fourth, the RDFI. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Julie Goff, who is on mute.
I am on mute. It had to happen at least once today. But before I dive in, I want to just encourage everybody to put your questions in the Q&A. Here, we'll have time to come back and answer questions. As you can tell, Trevor is a wonderful expert in these rules. So maybe a new question has come up for you today as you've heard kind of this analysis. Maybe you have been thinking with your teams about specific application of these rules to your customers, et cetera. So drop them in. There's no question that would be bad or silly. So just drop them in there. But LexAlign, right? That is what we are here to to represent as part of the toolkit that Trevor described. So to be very, simple about it, two and three, right? Trevor walked us through 2A, 2B, and three. So that's really where LexAlign comes in. We cover that base extraordinarily well for the toolkit. So, in essence, LexAlign is a compliance and risk management platform for the remote operations of our customers, right? All of these high risk transactions are now happening outside the four walls of the bank. How do we have insight and visibility and assurance, right, that rules are being communicated, addressed, et cetera, in that operating environment that the ODFI is not, seeing day in and day out? So, that is LexAlign in a nutshell. And so we do this by having essentially a conversation with the customer. We call this a diagnostic interview. So it is not a questionnaire, it's a very highly tailored diagnostic interview. We're walking them through a conversation, a series of questions and follow-ups, right? Where we are able to dial in the rules that actually apply to them based on the full range of authoritative sources, right? Today we're thinking quite deeply about the Nacha rules, but there's a range of them that we need to be thinking about and bringing into the fold. So we can find those gaps, we can inform the customers, we can give them very specific action steps. And then, as Trevor said, that data is coming back to the bank, and we are building those records, those reports, which is the basis of compliance. So, kind of see the full evolution there of how it all comes together. So this is what I like to describe as our bird's eye view of the LexAlign platform. And you'll see there at the bottom that we start with a very foundational diagnostic related to security, right? It's our security for electronic banking diagnostic, and that's essential for any type of customer or transaction, right? Because that's getting to the heart of the security of their operating environment. So how are they handling their network security, their IT infrastructure, devices, policies, procedure, right? All of those things that are going to have that are of deep importance, and the rules tell us so, relative to security, even before we get to a specific type of transaction. So in the world of ACH, we call security this foundational module ACH Part 1 because we cover that. And then we combine it with the ACH originator module and or the third-party sender module in order to get the fulsome analysis of all these rules that are going to be more transaction specific, right? So that's really kind of how we put this together. And then, of course, if a customer is both an RDC and a ACH customer, you're only asking them to go through that security analysis once a year. So why on earth are we doing this, right? Well, I think the answer is quite clear, right? These rules are difficult, right? We they change every year. They're difficult. It is very it's not realistic to ask our customers to understand them, not just understand them, that figure out how they apply, how to take action on them, right? So they're just this is where we're at. And I like to include the little picture of the rule book because you can see it's essentially a textbook that customers would have to interpret. So we can walk them through the analysis, and the new rules are now part of the LexAlign platform in order to make sure all of this comes together. And as we said, it's not just Nacha, right? It's the rules, it's the guidelines, it's the FAQs that support and clarify for us. And so we are monitoring and incorporating all of that. It's also Reg E, it's also BSA, right? So pulling all of those together in a way um, that is fluid for the customer experience, right? We're being sort of very thoughtful about how we take them through that analysis, but it is being very comprehensive. So LexAlign is a platform we're making these rules actionable vis-a-vis self-assessments, right? You heard Trevor talk about the assessments, the annual audits, right? So we're walking them through that conversation for every single customer, and through so doing, right, we are sort of interpreting rules and helping hone in and figure out what's necessary for them. So here's a great example, right? This is a screenshot from the FAQs to support the new Nacha rules. And this is an FAQ where it asks, do the rules themselves prescribe specific processes and procedures that ODFIs and originators must use to reasonably identify unauthorized entries or entries under false pretenses? Well, the simple answer is no. The rules do not prescribe specific procedures, but down below, it's also giving us some guidance, right? Originators may be in the best place to implement procedures to protect against account takeover or other vectors. Such procedures could include change controls regarding payment information and instructions for vendor and payroll payments. So now we've got something to actually put our teeth in and ask about, right? So here's how LexAlign would walk through, and this is deep into our ACH diagnostics. So we're kind of giving you some snippets here. But we've already learned from the customer that they're using ACH credits for payroll. There's plenty of other questions related to that. But as it pertains to the new rule, right, you've told us you're using ACH credits for payroll purposes. Here is what the new rule says as it relates to you. And we're asking, have you established procedures for your staff to follow upon receiving instructions to alter a payee's account information? And so you're going to learn through this question, are they doing this? And are they doing it in such a way that we feel good under those FAQs? We go further with the analysis. Are you also verifying before the first time that you pay them, right? You're going to get that because that's also important under the rules as well. So you can really see how we illuminate and ask those questions where they're relevant. We're not asking those questions if they're not using ACH for payroll. In addition, right, we talk about making them actionable through self-assessments, but along the way, we're sensitizing the person or the team member at the customer who's answering these questions, right? Because they're going to be educated along the way about which rules apply to them and what that actually means. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got the rule block from the operating rules, Article 2, and then we're going to break it down for them kind of section by section so that they can see it, they can see the actual definitions when things, apply. We're making them aware of those enforcement deadlines. And here's a great example as well, right? We're defining these new terms. Here's what false pretenses means under the rule. But we also say, in other words, here's what it requires of you, right? And sort of making it accessible and actionable as they're moving through this analysis. Once a customer is complete with their assessment, we have a series of outputs that are going to make this all sort of come full circle, right? So customers first receive what we call an audit report. So this is true for every module. You're going to see some ACH examples here. But this is true for security. This is true for our remote deposit capture diagnostic as well. But we've walked them through that analysis. The audit report that's delivered real time, there's no delay. They're going to see section by section, topic by topic, what is that compliance standard that they should be adhering to? What did they tell us they're actually doing? And then that gap analysis, right? So is compliance good? Classic thumbs up, thumbs down, not hard to interpret. But it's starting to hone in for them, where are those areas that they need to be starting to pay attention to. You'll get all of this data as well, which we're going to show you in just a second. But let's go back to our change control example that we just looked at from the FAQs, remember? So in their audit report, they're going to see something that looks like this that says, per the rules in the FAQs, change control procedures for payment changes are needed. You told us you haven't done that. And so we're going to say this is a gap that needs attention, and we'll walk them through. After the audit report, they get an action plan. So we actually map back to these rules. This is not arbitrary, but we map back to the rules, helping them see, hey, here's the rule based on the gap. Here's what you need to do. So we call that an action plan. Here's our example for the change control procedure, right? We cite the actual rule where we got this important guidance, and then we walk them through what's necessary in that procedure as they develop it, and they know exactly what to do. Once they have a series of things that they need to be responsive to about, we also have what we call our remediation plan. So this is really what opens up that line of communication between you and the customer because they know what they need to do, and over time, they're able to communicate back to the bank, which things they have remediated and closed, risk factors that they have closed out. So if we look at our change control example here, let's say in Q1, they've planned to put a procedure in place. So when they took the assessment, it was a no, but come March, they can come back in here, hit that remediate button, and then communicate back to you, hey, we put a procedure in place. Here's what it says. Here's when we had the staff acknowledge it, whatever that might be. Couple more things to point out on LexAlign as well. Here's a data point that we're extremely proud of. So consistently across our clients, our bank clients, we see a very high completion rate of LexAlign assessments among bank customers. We think there are a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot obviously in it for them, a lot of things that they get as an output of this. But we see about 80%, driven by all of the automated messaging, communications, follow-ups that are built into LexAlign. And then that compares with about 25% of response rates on questionnaires that may have been done prior to LexAlign going out to customers. So then we're kind of flipping gears here to the bank dashboard. So this is kind of what you would see for every assessment that is up and running across customers. You're going to see assessments as they come in real time. So you're going to see kind of what does that action look like? What does that data look like? And how close are we to 100% overall to get that assurance that you've got that visibility into all customers and that you're hitting, 2A, 2B, as Trevor just walked us through. Trevor also talked about that risk-based risk management, right? That's a big point of emphasis in the new rules. And so we have developed an auto-generated rating score. It's a 1 to 5 for every single customer, and for every single assessment. So you can filter very easily. You and your staff can very easily filter and say, hey, we want to focus on the 4s and 5s, for instance, right? And by doing that, you have demonstrated that you're doing risk-based risk management because you're saying you have a way of defining, quantifying that, and then paying attention to those 4s and those 5s, for instance. Also at the entity level, I like to call this screen, this is all the data that is back on the bank dashboard side. So just to clarify that, you get a summary of all of that assessment data that's coming back from the customer. That's all real time. So this is a tab for the ACH originator module. You're going to see exactly how they answered on all of our different questions, what's pertinent, what's not. If they happen to do a lot of different types of transactions, this page could be long. If they're just doing 1 or 2 types of transactions, it'll be quite short and succinct. But here again, here's where our change control comes through. So you have easy indication of who is and isn't doing those sorts of things. Now, let's say we saw on one customer that change control isn't in place, and now we're curious, well, is this all of our customers or is it just, a handful? Well, through the reporting mechanisms here, right, you can isolate those particular variables, those particular risk factors, and run reporting and see, this is actually an issue at 80, 90% of our customers. Maybe we want to develop, messaging, communication, education to try to spur people on. So I know that was quick an overview of LexAlign. We didn't go into the live platform itself. I know many of you have already seen the live platform, and we love to do demos and conversations. So just know that that's always an option, but we wanted to be respectful of your time today. And here's kind of a summary, right? We talked through the three puzzle pieces of what the rules are sort of requiring and asking of us. And two and three, as you just saw, that's really where LexAlign plays a role, augmenting all the other tools that you have in place today to do the other pieces. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Are there any questions that have come to mind? Things that are on your... So yes, we will be sharing a link of the recording. All right, well, I have a few questions here, Trevor, for you to kind of further clarify the rules that have come up before for us. So here's one that says, if we can identify which customers have gaps in areas like change management, right? Maybe like the example we just saw, how targeted does our follow-up with those customers need to be in order to satisfy a risk-based approach? You're on mute.
Thanks. Just realized that. I think as a preliminary matter, you don't have to do anything because by the time you see any data on your dashboard, you've already acted on it. You've already given the customer an audit report, an action plan, or a remediation checklist. You've sensitized and empowered them, and you can demonstrate that to your examiners and your auditors. But yes, there could be an expectation, and you might see it in your interest to do some follow-on. Well, we've made that easy for you because you can automate follow-on emails to your customers that say, "Hey, you've remediated 2 out of your 5 gaps. You're off to a great start, but please continue to work on those 3 remaining gaps that were identified in your audit report." So that can happen. Or, as Julie said, you can generate a report and say, "Show me all the customers to which the change management guidance applies and what they're doing." And then you'll be able to see which ones are in compliance and which ones have a gap. And you could send that list out to their relationship managers so that they can reach out to the customers. And the positive there is by the time they reach out to the customers, they're no longer the policeman going there to assess them with their checkboards. They're going to reach out as people there to help. Let's help you stay safe. And we really care about your resilience and your business continuity and keeping you from becoming victims of fraud. And so this is an area where we've determined that it could be helpful to you. So you can either just rely on the system and the audit report, and you could also automate follow on, or you can then take the next step and reach out to help them. So that's up to you.
That's great. All right, we just got another question in, and I was remiss in speaking to this, Trevor, so you can take this one. But about how long does it take for customers to complete each of our LexAlign modules, diagnostics?
They're designed to be completed in less than 30 minutes. Each of them, we have solid data on that. With ACH, it's variable because it really depends on what kinds of transactions they're doing. Different transactions have different types of rules that apply. So if they're doing consumer credit transactions or consumer debit transactions that are recurring, that involve telephone or web authorizations, there are quite a few more rules that would apply than if they're simply doing a corporate a CCD transactions. And so it could be they completed that particular module as quickly as 10 minutes, or it could take 30 minutes or perhaps a little bit longer if they're doing a very wide range of transactions. But all in all, it's less than 30 minutes. They can start and stop. They don't have to do it all in one sitting. They can also invite a colleague to take over if they don't know what's going, know the answer. They can do that through their dashboard. And so it's really not onerous, and it's designed not to be more onerous, actually to be less onerous than the questionnaire approach.
Absolutely, that's great. And what would you say to maybe banks that are already sort of sending either copies of the rule book or ordering those for every single customer? Does this provide a way to sort of give them that resource without the physical copy itself?
Well, some of that depends on what's required under your payment association. Sometimes they do require you to send a subscription code or the book to your customer. What LexAlign does though is it operationalizes, as you saw in Julie's presentation. It's designed to operationalize those rules. So to take the customer and identify by asking them questions about what they're doing, in other words, asking them questions that they know the answers to, it'll identify which of those rules actually pertain to them, then take them through the analysis under those rules. And in their audit report, as Julie showed, it'll identify these are the rules that actually apply to you. And here's how you're doing. And here's where you need to do more. And this is what you do. And so it's really operationalizing them and making them pertinent and accessible and actionable to the customer. We also take pains to tell them when there's a new rule that applies to them. So, for instance, if they're doing consumer credits for payroll purposes, there's that new rule that they include the word payroll in the company entry description field. And that, if you remember my presentation earlier, that's meant to help the RDFI identify when a particular consumer account is getting multiple payroll credits. And that's obviously a flag that Nacha has called out that your solution should detect. And so the rules are meant to sort of play together, but the key point is that LexAlign informs the customer of new rules as you're required to do, but as they are pertinent to the customer, rather than burying them in a list of rules that most of which are probably not pertinent to a particular customer.
And that actually hits on another question that we got, which is how are banks supposed to keep originators aligned as Nacha guidance evolves year over year? So I think you just answered
Yeah.
that.
We've got a new question. Do you suggest the customer complete the questionnaire annually? As you saw under the new rule, there is an annual assessment requirement. Actually, the rule says at least annually, so it depends on the customer's risk. But generally, yes, generally the expectation is, and it's not our expectation, this is not just it's regulators in general, that these are annual reviews. You might determine that you don't need to do the security every year, or you might determine that for some customers you should. But the rules review, especially the Nacha rules review, and specifically as it applies to these new fraud monitoring rules, there is an explicit requirement that it's done at least annually.
Great. Well, I want to kind of put you on the hot seat a little bit, Trevor, because you have a really interesting vantage point, I think, right? You're talking to bankers every day about risk and compliance and what's on their mind. So, what would you say has been kind of the biggest aha that's come up over the past 90 days or so as people are really thinking deeply about the fraud monitoring rules for next year?
I mean, I think I hate to be self-serving in this, but I think it's what we're focusing on here today is that it will take a toolkit
Mm-hmm.
to really address the rule as expansive as it is the fact that it covers different parties who have different roles and different risks, and in some cases, an automated solution that's installed at the bank will check a box. In other cases, you need to deal with more human factor risk on the side of the customer, and so that's about sensitizing and empowering them. I think it is the fact that we need to do as Nacha called out in 2022, we need all participants to play a role
Mm-hmm.
and each to play a role that's specific to what their role is um, in the landscape, of the ACH landscape. What about you, Julie? Is there a particular issue that you've seen?
I think just a real appreciation for how complex the rules are, especially all of the rules, right? If we put them all together on the ACH side, it is, I mean, not just the Nacha rule book, but kind of all the authoritative sources and really making sure that how do we get to a place where we're super confident that we've hit on all, on all the things we need to ask about, right? Like that level of confidence, and
Yeah,
having a solution for that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There is a point here that compliance is not a zero or one. It's not a 100% or zero. Um, Compliance is as you often say, Julie, it's a journey,
It
and it's a
is.
journey that we now have to take the customer on in addition because they're handling these high risk, highly regulated activities. And so we're providing an experience to them that can take them on that journey with us and provide us with the data points that enable us to do the risk-based risk management that the
That's
regulators
right.
expect of us.
Because I think we have heard from many bankers. I don't necessarily know if I want to see all this data, right? I don't necessarily know if I want to see all these gaps. And I think what the rules are telling us is, no, it's better for you to have that data, right, than to be blind to it. So you're doing the right thing by collecting the data and the insight, not ignoring it.
And if I might add to that, we cannot prevent 100% of fraud.
No,
But when fraud happens, then we're sometimes faced with other consequences, and this could be a regulatory scrutiny
that's right.
or audit scrutiny. And that's when having these records and indicating that we were taking these rules seriously and we were acting on them is of crucial importance to protect against a situation which would be, many, many times worse than
That's
the
right.
underlying fraud itself. And so the records are really there to protect you.
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
I think we should probably wrap it up and thank everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you everyone for being here. And I mean, many of you have participated in other webinars with us, and we're so grateful you keep coming back. We're going to keep doing this, right? We're on a journey, on a journey for our compliance journeys. And so I think what's really helpful for us is to hear from you on topics that are maybe still a little murky. If there are areas that you want us to dive into, we can pull in other, experts and things to really make this a powerful resource for you and your team. So let us know, and we look forward to the next one. Thank you so much.